Hi, welcome to Invent Academy. This is Invent Academy's Intro to Blender series. My name is Faye. I am a freshman here at University of Michigan, and I am studying Business Administration and Computer Science. A little bit about me. My favorite movie is Avatar, and I love this movie for its amazing sci-fi and cinematography and its world building. It's just a great movie. You should definitely check out if you haven't watched it already. On today's agenda is, first of all, a quick intro to Blender, and then I'm going to walk you through the steps to download Blender, and then we're going to go through a basic user interface tour. And the pictures on this slide are basically things that you can achieve with Blender. The cool things you can render, animations, rigging, and that orange picture is Blender's icon logo. And so what is Blender? Blender is this powerhouse. It's this free open source 3D graphics toolkit, and it allows somebody to create just about anything they want. It's highly beginner friendly, and that's basically because there is a host of resources in the online community. For example, YouTube, Google, dozens of channels and websites dedicated to creating Blender tutorials and guiding people through learning how to master Blender's dozens of techniques. One resource I would recommend you to check out is Blender Guru, and he is a YouTuber, and he has amazing tutorials that you should definitely check out for further instruction. And so on Blender, you can create modeling, 3D films, animations, applications, even entire scenes in virtual reality. You can make a video, you can make animations out of these, and there's just so much in Blender that you can do. And so for downloading Blender, there are hardware requirements. Recommended is probably a 64-bit quad-core CPU with at least 16 GB of RAM. The pen and tablet requirement is actually optional. It's mostly useful for if you wanted to texture paint or maybe sculpt in greater detail, but for the purposes of this series, a 3-button mouse is just fine. And so Blender does take up some storage space, about 200 megabytes. However, you could put it on a USB drive and it will work directly on top of that, right out of the box. And the good thing about a USB drive is you could also obviously transfer it to multiple devices. So here's the download link. We'll just follow that to Blender's website. And if you're using a PC like I am, clicking this blue box will be enough. If you're using Mac, down in this drop-down option are different options you could select based on whether you're using the Intel version for Macs or the Apple Silicon. And so when you open Blender, next on the to-do list is a interface tour. And so there are a couple of different things I want to go through. So right after opening Blender, you should see this box and then a general layout window. So there are a couple of options for new files. There's general, there's a 2D animation, sculpting. We're just going to stay with general for now. And this brings you to the basic user interface. And so, Number 1 on our interface tour is the different layout modes present in Blender. And so, here, you can see on top there are different modes you can go into. Layout is the most basic. And then there's modeling mode, which will allow you to edit your objects in greater detail. There's sculpting mode, which allows you to sculpt it and create even finer details into the geometry of your object. It's essentially like clay, and you can mold it however you want. There's UV editing mode, texture painting mode, shading, animation, rendering, and this is what you would export as your final. Often people export renders, and this is where you could see a preview of that. There's compositing mode and scripting mode. We're going to go back to layout mode, and then hit number 2 on our checklist, which is the transform toolbar. And so the transform toolbar is found in the upper right corner. There's a little drop down here, and what the transform toolbar does is it gives you a whole host of very interesting details about your object. For example, its exact location, its rotation, its scale, and its dimensions. And so here there's X, Y, and Z that will tell you precisely where the object is in terms of its X, Y, and Z axes, and you can actually modify these by, there's a little arrow when you hover over it, and you can drag the arrow to slide the object on its axis. And that's the same for rotation. For example, I can drag this arrow to rotate it on its y-axis, or I can scale the object exclusively in the z direction if I want to. And then here in the dimensions, it tells you exactly how big your object is. And besides using the arrow, you can also just directly input a number, like 5, and it will go to 5 on the x-axis. Next, there is the scene collection, and what the scene collection is, it's an overview of everything found in your scene. You can hide entire scenes if you want with the eye icon, or you can also hide individual ones if you just don't want to see them for now. So in every basic scene collection, there's usually your object. There's a camera, which will capture your object and is essentially what you see in the render. If you want different angles of the render, you will have to position your camera in different angles, and then there is one basic lighting option that you can edit later if you want to. So after the scene collection, there is a material properties editor, which is this giant panel. And the materials properties editor basically has a bunch of useful options you can use to transform your object. Here there's the modifiers, and all of these are modifiers that you can use to edit your object. For example, there are highly useful ones like subdivision surface, which will give your object more vertices and edges to play around with. Stuff like solidify, mirror, array, and the good thing about modifiers is you can add and delete them, which means you can essentially edit your object but also have highly reversible actions that would otherwise take long times to reverse. Other useful ones that I use the most are the materials section, which you can change basic information like the base color of it to different colors, and it doesn't come out in this mode. You would have to go to a different mode to see it. You can also change different things like metallicness, the tint, the roughness. These are all things about the material your object is made out of. There's also ones like the particles and a lot of other ones in the materials properties editor. Number 5 is the timeline, which is often used for animation. That's not going to be an emphasis in this video, but it is useful just to know where the timeline is. And finally, last is the side toolbar, which has just some basic navigation and editing materials. Here is the selecting, 2 ways to select here, a couple ways to select. There is the cursor, which is where new objects will add to. If you wanted to add a new object, this is the object will add in the location of the cursor. This is a basic move, basic rotate, and then there are some other ones that don't get used very often, but are still here. And that is essentially the basic interface tour. And thank you so much for coming along with me for this Intro to Blender series.